Which dogs are on the thing now? These are not these two dogs.
Yeah, these are two. The big one taking a swipe at Maya, that's Quinn. That's like the second day I got it. They just love to play. Just love to play. Yeah. Uh, okay, so why don't we get started?
Okay.
And how about if you tell me your full name?
Gloria Jean Morehouse.
Okay. Can you repeat that 3 times? Because I'm not sure I have a good audio level for you.
Gloria Jean Morehouse. Gloria Jean Morehouse.
One more time.
Gloria Jean Morehouse.
Okay, great. Wonderful. What other names have you gone by?
Gloria Smith and Gloria Johnston.
Uh-huh.
Those are the only other 2 names I've ever had.
Okay. So, why don't you tell me about your parents? What are your parents' names?
My mother's name is Susan Marie. Her maiden name was Ogeen. And my father's name is Robert Morehouse. I'm trying to remember his middle name, and I'm going to be honest with you, I can't remember. He has a middle name, but I can't remember what it is. Robert Joseph, maybe.
Ogeen?
That was my mother's maiden name, yes.
Uh-huh. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
It's Spanish. It's Spanish, and I've had some interesting times with it because just recently I found my mother's birth certificate, baptismal certificate, and on it, her father's name is listed as something I've never seen before, and I didn't bring it with me, so I can't pronounce it for you because it's nothing I know. So I took it into the secretary, who happens to be Mexican, so I thought, she might know the name. I said, have you ever seen that before? And she said, never, Gloria, never. And I said, I don't know what it means. We always called my grandfather Joe. So I don't know what this is all about. She looked it up on a translation thing, and it's definitely Spanish. It comes from Spain. But in the little preface, when it's talking about it, it said Jose. So we think that's where it came from, but it means something else in Spain, which only kind of sparked my interest even more. And then she looked up Ogeen, because she said, I've never heard that either. And I knew that. I knew that it was not a Mexican name and that I'd never heard it with any other Mexicans. Ogeen is definitely, it's Spain. He came from Spain, and that's what my grandmother told me, was that my grandfather's father came from Spain. She told me he was probably in trouble because they often sent them to New Mexico when they got in trouble in Spain. But she didn't know what he had done, so I never knew that, just that my grandmother told me that. I don't even know if it's true, but that's what, he was in New Mexico, and that's where he met his wife. And her name was Baldwin, and I can't even tell you her first name because I don't remember, but she was English. And Grandma said that she didn't speak Spanish and he didn't speak English when they first met. But they got married and had a lot of kids, and they lived in New Mexico. And so that's my grandfather's side of the family. My grandfather's the youngest of his family. And if you've seen pictures, and I have pictures, so you will have seen pictures of your great-grandfather. He was not very tall, and he's dark-haired and dark-eyed, and had like a shadowy beard. It's the one thing I remember from my childhood because I would always kiss him goodbye when we would leave, and it would scratch. And that's a childhood memory of mine, is that my grandfather's beard always scratched. But that was my grandfather. And interestingly enough, I've met a lot of his sisters and his brother Philip, who I also have a picture of, who is blonde and blue-eyed and over 6 feet tall. Interesting, right? I mean, the combination of and I vaguely remember some of his sisters coming to visit. People would come to my grandmother's house all the time to stay, and they would come. But Philip's the one I remember because we went to New Mexico and stayed with his daughter, and he was around, and I didn't like him. As a child, my memory was that he was mean. And he probably was just gruff, but to a child, he seemed mean. But I have a really...
Was he mean to you, or was he mean to everybody?
I just think he was, I think he was kind of rash, you know, he would talk quickly and expect you to move. Do it now, that kind of thing. My grandfather wasn't at all like that, so I guess that was my comparison. I just didn't like him. I think the other reason I didn't like him is because later on I found out that his wife was blind and he cheated on her. That did it for me. I didn't like them. But there was a real contrast in their looks, and so I always thought that was amazing when I would look at pictures of him. And the picture that I have of him, of course, he has white hair, but Mother said he was blue-eyed and he was blonde. She remembers him from when she was younger, of course. And
okay, so that was Philip, right?
that's my Uncle Philip.
Your Uncle Philip. How about if you tell me the Susan's siblings?
Okay, let's see. My mother's the oldest, and then my Aunt Rosie is next. What do you want to know about my Aunt Rosie? She's 2 years younger.
Why don't you just give me the
names first?
The names first,
Okay.
and don't dive into them.
Okay. My Aunt Rosie, and then there was my Uncle Leo, and there's my Uncle Frank, then there's my Aunt Clara, then there was my Uncle Andy, and then there was my Uncle Philip. Those are all the ones that lived. I have a picture of one of them, and I think she's between, I think she's after Frank, because the picture I have shows Frank with her, and her name was Ruby. And they said she got into the poison under the sink, and it killed her when she was just little. She was about 2 or something like that. But I have a picture of her in my old scrapbook. But that's the story I'm told. But those are all my mother's siblings. They're all younger than she is, and some of them younger than me.
Okay, so tell me, why don't we take them one by one,
Okay.
and just tell me some of your memories of them.
My Aunt Rosie is 2 years younger, and she had several children, of course, my first cousins, and she married my uncle Bob. We had a lot of Bobs in our family. His name is Bob Duffy, and I always liked my Uncle Duffy because he was fun. He was a plumber, and he would come by the house after he'd do a job and just come in and have coffee and visit all the time. He liked to talk, and he was just a lot of fun, and I just have really good memories of him. My Aunt Rosie was I don't have a lot of strong memories of her. She was always there, but she didn't impose as much. In the end, I think she is the one that actually took care of my grandfather later in his life. It wasn't my mother, but it was my Aunt Rosie who took care of him. She was always good with me. She always, you know, did whatever she could for me when my husband was dying. You're the one that stayed with her at her house with her daughters and her one son. She only had one son, and she had daughters, and that's where we were staying when we were going to leave when your father died. So yeah, she was always very fond of my mother. I do know that. She often would tell me things about my mother to kind of, you know, I don't think she was real. But one time she said to me that the reason that she was kind of angry with my mother was that they all were born in Watrous, New Mexico. And apparently they were pretty happy there, I guess. And my mother got pregnant, and that's why they moved to Denver, is because she got pregnant. And of course it was very scandalous, and they brought her to Denver to have the baby. And I think that they had intended that she would give the baby away. She's never actually said that, but that's the impression I got from her and my grandmother. I'm talking about me. And then she said one time, my mother said to me that it was my grandfather who said that she needed to keep the baby. So then she brought the baby home. And that was me. So those are my impressions of my Aunt Rosie.
So is Aunt Rosie the one who told you that story?
Yeah.
Did anyone ever confirm it?
No, my mother didn't really. If you asked her things like that, she kind of brushed them aside. Because it was a story about her, and she didn't like to be in a bad light in any way, shape, or form. So that was a bad light. So that's why I heard the other part that it was she knew how fond I was of my grandmother. I was very close to my grandmother. So she would always, anything she could tell me bad about my grandmother was okay with her. But then she said it was it was up to her father, and her father said she was to bring the baby home. So that's how come I came home. So I thought, okay, yeah. That's all she said about it, you know. But my Aunt Rosie originally told me, and then I asked my mother, and that's what my mother told me.
Okay, well, after Rosie, then there was who? Who's next?
Leo.
Leo.
Uncle Leo. I have pictures of him. I'm sure you've seen him on the wall with my mother. And he is good looking, very good looking. And I think the only person my mother ever loved. Truly. She loved him beyond anybody else that she, including her children, truly. And the reason I say that is because my Uncle Leo got into lots of trouble. He was into drugs, and that was way back when I was a little child, so that was long before drugs were all over the place. But so he was in with a bad crowd, not a gang, because at that point they didn't have a lot of gangs, you know. But he was in with a crowd that got into lots of trouble and was into drugs. And he eventually killed himself in jail. And what happened was he had gone down to Mexico to get drugs, and they were watching him. They knew what they were doing, and they were watching him. And on his way back, they picked him up. And
who did?
The police. And
the police?
The police, and they put him in jail. It was probably the FBI, because the police don't, you know, the border, it's kind of probably FBI, I don't know. But they put him in jail. Doesn't matter, they put him in jail. And while he had been in jail once before, and I don't really remember why, but the state prison was quite a ways away from where we lived. But my mother did not drive, but my parents made that trip often so she could see her brother while he was in jail. And I think he was only in jail for about a year. But when he got out, he said, I will never go back. I will never go back. And so we think that when they arrested him, they just put him in a kind of county jail, you know, holding him. They were going to transfer him, and he hung himself. And we think that's why. The memories I have of Leo is he's very good looking, very charming.
Is he the guy I saw a photo and he has a fedora?
No.
Nice suit?
No, that's my grandfather.
Oh, is it?
That's my grandfather.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my grandfather always wore that fedora, that hat. Always. I don't remember a time he didn't, you know. But my uncle, the pictures on the wall, it's with my Uncle Frank and my mother and Leo, the three of them. It's on the wall. You have to look next time. He's tall, dark. He's very good looking, very charming. But he was it was all about Leo. It was all about Leo. One time he got stabbed. I don't know what was going on. I was too young to know all the details, but I do know he came to our house and that my mother took care of him and nursed him back and harbored him because he was running from somebody. And he was there for a long time till he got well. It was bad stabbing, and but there wasn't anything she wouldn't do for him. She hawked the house for bail for him one time. My father was furious, you know. But that's what I'm telling you. That's how much she loved him. Is that there was not much she wouldn't do for him. And I have a memory of when he got married, and now he never. I don't know if him and Dolores ever got married, but she was my Aunt Dolores. I didn't care. And he had 4 daughters. They all lived with my grandmother because he was always gone. He was always gone. And my grandmother took care of the family, and my Aunt Dolores stayed there, and she kept house because my grandmother cleaned houses. And of course, my grandfather was working, so she took care of her kids and stayed there and took care of the other kids that were home at the time. And then he'd come home. Well, my grandma's house had a staircase, and I was going upstairs one time for whatever reason, and and their door was open. Their bedroom door was open. And now I know he was shooting up. But at that point, I didn't know because they had a spoon and they were heating underneath it. And at that point, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't have any idea what was going on. And he just told me to go back downstairs, and I always did what he said. I didn't like him, so I go downstairs anyway. And I mostly, I think, because he never did anything to me, I think I didn't like him because I knew how much my mother cared about him. And then he, so I remember that memory of him, and I remember the last time I saw him because he took my Uncle Bob's car. He borrowed my Uncle Bob Duffy's car to go to Mexico. So we were all over there on a Saturday night over at my grandparents'. We were always there on Saturdays. And he came in, and I remember he said to me, so I had to have been older, because he said something about, boy, you really are growing up. So he made some comment about the fact that I was getting to look like a young lady. And I just kind of looked at him. Didn't say anything. I didn't quite know what that was all about. But he left, and that was the last time I saw him. When we found out he died, my mother was pregnant with my sister Christina, and she, so when the call came in, it came up from my Uncle Frank, who lived next door. So I called my Uncle Frank. He came over and took the call, and he got off the phone, and he said, Leo's dead. And my mother freaked out. I mean, freaked out. It was pretty awful. And we had to go to my grandmother's. My dad wasn't home yet. So I wrote a note to my dad saying that Uncle Leo killed himself and that we were over at Grandma's. My dad had that note when we went through his papers. He kept that note that I had written.
How old were you when you wrote that?
When I
wrote that?
I'm guessing about maybe 12, maybe 13, 12 or 13, right in through there. But interesting that I wrote the note, right? I always thought that was interesting afterwards that I was the one who wrote the note. But I thought that I'll have to talk to you again about my dad, my memories of my dad, and the things that we found afterwards, because he was the one that kept everything. So that's my Uncle Leo. And,
okay, so
Uncle
who'd be
Frank.
next? Andy?
Oh, my Uncle Frank. It's my favorite uncle, my Uncle Frank.
And, I remember Uncle Frank.
Yeah, you've met Uncle Frank. But you didn't know him when he was younger, and the man was so much fun. He would come to the house. He was great on movies. He loved movies. So he would go to the movies, and he would come and tell us all about the movies. And that's probably part of where I get my having to tell you the whole story and the whole business, because that's how he was. And I loved listening to him. I loved it. And he could sing. He had a beautiful voice. And him and his buddies would be out on my grandmother's porch just singing, harmonizing, just singing. And they sounded great. He always had a beautiful. But my mother had a very, very good voice too. So that's not surprising. A lot of people in the family had it. Not me, but a lot of people in the family did have it. And she, so my Uncle Frank ended up moving next door to us because my dad got him a job and then helped him find a place. When he married my Aunt Isabel, and my dad helped him to kind of get established. And, but I remember walking. I would be going to school and he would be walking to Federal Way because that's where he'd have to catch his bus to go to work. And so he would always be telling me stories. He used to hitchhike. He used to get on trains and hitchhike to California and stuff like that, him and his buddies. And then he would tell us the stories when he'd come back. I mean, he was just lots of fun, And he always had great stories. And he was always just fun to be around, And he was good with his kids, and he was, I guess he wasn't a perfect man. I hear lots of other things about him, but, he probably drank too much. And, once my Aunt Isabel had her accident, then he wasn't really there for anybody. And Ruby and I, his oldest daughter, have connected since then. And, she tells me a lot of things. She told me a lot of things like that. And of course, I was gone by then. I had moved up here, and I only went back there to visit. But I'll tell you, when I would go back to visit Denver, the first stop was to see my Aunt Isabel, because she would fill me in on everybody and everything. And I loved my Aunt Isabel.
Well, tell me a little bit about Isabel.
She was married by Uncle Frank. She was a year or two older than my Uncle Frank, but she was really she was so good, and she took care of everybody. She took care of my grandmother when my grandmother was dying. She took care of her grandmother. You know, she was always there for everybody, and she was really a very giving person. And when she was in this car accident, she used to smoke. She was a chain smoker. And when she got into this accident, she was hit by a tow truck. And they didn't think she'd live, and she did, but she was never the same. And she didn't smoke for a long time. Then somebody told her that she used to smoke, and so she started smoking again, and we were all like, oh my Lord, and, you know, you got rid of it. They also didn't know if she'd be able to speak Spanish, because she was very fluent in Spanish, and whether or not it would come back to her, but it did. But she lived in a nursing home the rest of her life, and Roseanne, her youngest daughter, was the one that spent the most time with her. I went to see her one time when I went back, and it just wasn't my Aunt Isabel. And it was really hard for me to see her like that. So I didn't go see her. But when she died, I didn't go back for the funeral, but I sent flowers, and I sent a card talking about my Aunt Isabel to her daughters. And Roseanne sent me a card back and said, sorry, that was really hard. I've forgotten all about it. She said, my mother really loved you, and she thought you were really a good person. And I thought, wow, I really love my Aunt Isabel. Sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I met Ruby a lot.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me about Ruby?
Yeah, that's his oldest daughter, and she has lupus. And she doesn't have the kind my brother had. She had the exterior kind. She can't be out in the sun. It gives her scars. It'll like boils, and it'll break. And so she has to stay out of the sun or really cover up her face and everything. So that, and you know, she was real little. I have lots of pictures of her when she was little, because they lived next door. And, you know, she was real tiny. She was just real fun to be around. And I would take her everywhere with me, and people would say, she was so little, I know, you know, she was darling. But I wasn't around when she grew up, so we didn't have a real trite connection after I moved away. But she's made that connection since then, and she emails me constantly, and she asks me a lot of questions, and it's been interesting because I realized then that she didn't know, like she didn't know my grandma. She didn't know my grandma at all. She doesn't have any memories of her. So I've written her lots of things about my grandma. And then, and she's asked about other members of the family, and I've written her, you know, what I remember about them. And she knew my Aunt Rosie and my Uncle Bob because they lived right next door. But she's married and has a couple of kids, and she sees very little of her father. And it really hurts her. It hurts her a lot. And, but you know, she said she was in a grocery store one time with her son, and her father walked in, and he said, "Hi, Grandpa," and he didn't know him. That's how little he sees his grandchildren. He didn't know him. And I thought how really, very, very sad that was. You know, but anyway.
Okay, well, let's get back to we're at Frank.
Yeah,
we just finished Frank, and
my Frank is still alive, and he's now the oldest of all of my mother's brothers and sisters that's still alive. So then there's Clara, and my Aunt Clara is 2 months older than I am. She was born in April, and I was born in June, and so we've never. Obviously, I've never called her Aunt Clara. It's ridiculous, you know. We are of the same age, and she's. I think she looks a lot like my grandmother, especially now that she's gotten older. But my dad didn't. I remember saying that one time, and my father did not like that. my father was very fond of my grandmother, and he wasn't very fond of Clara. So, and Clara was just quiet. We have really different memories of my grandmother. One time she came to visit us when we were living in Tacoma. She came up with her daughter, and she stayed with us for a while. And she said to me, talk to me about your memories about Grandma. So I was telling her about my grandma and how I felt about her. And she said, you know, I never felt that way about her. She said she was my mother, so I had to, you know, I had to do everything just perfect for her. I was her daughter, so I had to learn how to wash and do the things that she thought were important. And see, she never did that with me. I was her oldest grandchild, and I was pretty spoiled as far as my grandma was concerned. She would always cook my favorite things when I came over, you know, and I could do no wrong. And, you know, and she let me do whatever I wanted. So, of course, I loved her. I mean, come on, she spoiled me rotten. But she didn't spoil my Aunt Clara rotten, and my Aunt Clara doesn't have as nice memories of her. And then the other interesting thing is, though, my Aunt Clara thinks more of my mother as her mother. She was older, you know. And my mother, I guess, was more sympathetic towards her when things happened, more so than my grandmother was. And that's the memory she has, is that Susan was there for her. Susan was never there for me. So, and I said, isn't that strange that would happen? And she said, yeah, and I know what you're saying about Susan, because I know that she was like that a lot, but she said she wasn't like that with me. And she was always very... One time one of Clara's boyfriends beat her up, I guess, and she ended up in the hospital. My mother took my dad's gun and threatened him. I think she was going to shoot him. She might have. But...
Your mother?
My mother, yeah. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to me too, but she was really mad because I guess he really beat her up. I wasn't there, so I don't know. This is what I was told. But my dad was mad because, of course, they confiscated the gun and wouldn't give it back to him. So he told my mother to leave his guns alone, you know. But, yeah, interesting. I'd forgotten that story. But, yeah, Claire was, she has 2 children. A son who you guys remember when we went down to California that Chris used to imitate all the time with the accent, you know. He used to do Leroy really well. And then she has a daughter who she didn't raise, which was interesting. She raised her part of the time, and then my cousin Roseanne ended up raising her. I don't know the whole story there. And I've never asked Roseanne, but she ended up with Roseanne, and Roseanne's the one that sent her to school, and, you know, and she's always known who her mother was, and she visits with her, but Roseanne was the one that was there. But why that happened, I can't tell you. I don't know that story. All of a sudden it dawns on me, I don't know that story. I'll have to ask. Well, there's still somebody around to tell me. But, because both of them are around. She lives in California, my aunt Claire does. And she's married. And she's happy in California, and I guess Leroy's down there too. And, no, it's not her daughter. Clara raised her daughter. It's Leroy's daughter that Roseanne raised. That's who it is. Leroy had a child out of wedlock, and the mother didn't want the child, and Roseanne took the child. That was it. Oh, God. Wow. How confusing can you get? But anyway, that's the story.
Okay.
And Clara, then there's Andy, my Uncle Andy. And he was 2 years younger than me, so he was the same age as my brother. And so the 4 of us obviously spent a lot of time together as children because we were all of the same age, right? My Uncle Andy was always heavier than my brother. My brother was real slight and tall then, and my Uncle Andy was heavier. I don't have a lot of strong memories about him. He was always there. He always just was with us. He always did things with us, but he wasn't wasn't a strong personality or somebody that I, talked to a lot. Or my brother would probably have better memories of him. I do remember when my brother died, we were concerned because my brother by then had been in the service, had finally grown into himself and had a little more bulk. They looked exactly the same. And it was scary when I saw my brother because I said, oh, somebody better warn Andy before he sees him, because it's like looking at yourself. It's kind of creepy, And he died, and I'm not gonna remember. I don't know when he died. He was a man, so he was older than my brother because my brother died when my brother would have been 20. Died in the summer, and he would have been 20 in September. So Andy had to have been maybe 5 years older than that. So maybe he was 25 or 26. I know he was very young, and he died. And I don't remember an illness. Maybe it was an accident. I don't know. I'll have to ask. Somebody must remember that.
Okay, so those were the children on...
No, Philip.
Philip?
One more. We got Philip. And Philip is even younger than that. I don't know how old Philip. Well, he's very young. Obviously, he's the baby of the family. And he lives outside of Denver. And again, I wasn't raised with him. He was a spoiled, rotten kid because obviously he was born late in my grandmother's life, and everybody spoiled him rotten. And then when my grandmother got so sick, got cancer, he went to live with my Uncle Frank and my Aunt Isabel, and they raised him. And he lives outside of the city now, but he was raised with them because my grandmother was too ill, and then she died. And my grandfather was alone. He didn't take the responsibility. So Isabel there's Isabel. She said, yes, he needs a home, and we'll take care of him. And they just took him in. That was it. So those are my mother's siblings, and there are only 3 of them alike. My Uncle Frank, my Aunt Clara, and my Uncle Philip. Those are the 3 that are left.
So how about if you tell me about Susan's parents?
Okay, and I did tell you a little bit. That's what I was telling you about. I was telling you about...
I know yeah, but let's focus in on them for a minute.
Okay, that's my grandfather Joe, and I told you about his friends, but let me tell you about him. He ran the dumps in Denver when they moved to Denver, and that was a time when you could independently do that kind of stuff. And my father's told me that he went through 2 fortunes running those dumps because he would give money away to anybody who asked for it. That's what my dad told me. He said if he would just keep his money, your grandmother would never have had to work, but your grandfather, would go have a couple of drinks, and people would say, hey, Joe, I need this, and he'd say, oh, sure, and he'd give it to them. That's the kind of guy he was, and he, I have lots of good memories about my grandfather. We would go over there every Saturday to my grandparents' home. It didn't matter, and we would go to the park, which was a block away, and there were lots of things to do over there. And we'd come home. My grandfather would come home from work, and he'd had a couple, and he would give us money. And back then, he would give us $1. And back then, $1 was a lot of money. And we could go to the corner drugstore and get paper dolls and candy and, too much junk. But nobody ever told my grandfather he couldn't do something like that. My grandfather did what he wanted to do. So on Saturday nights, the guitars would come out. My mother played guitar, my Uncle Bob played guitar, and people would be singing, and they would be drinking, but they would be singing. And it was a joyous thing. It was not it was fun. I always remember it with good memories, and often I would go in, my grandfather would be sitting in the chair in the dining room, and I would get up on his lap, and he would sing me songs, and he would sing to me. And I remember years later, and he would sing in Spanish. Didn't matter. I was little. I loved him, and because he was paying attention to me. And my mother said later, one time I said, Mom, do you know this song that Grandpa used to sing to me? And she said, so what is it? So what was it like? And so I would I remembered parts of it, so I was telling her. And she said, he was singing that to you? And I said, yeah, what's wrong with it? She said, well, it's about this prostitute who's, you know. Anyway, it was kind of funny that he was singing these songs to me, but my mother says. Anyway, my grandfather used to run the dumps, and sometimes he would let us go with him. And so we'd pile on the truck, and we'd go to the dump, and then, come on, dumps were a lot different than they are now. There would be the stuff all over the place, so you could just rummage through it, and nobody, I mean, I guess there wasn't as much, I don't know if there wasn't as much danger, or we just didn't know it, but we would go through this stuff and find lots of stuff that was salvageable, or that we wanted, or whatever, and Dad and Grandpa would let us take them home, okay? But one time I found these coins that had been melted down. There was a stack of them like this, and they were quarters. There was a stack of coins, and I said, can I have these, Grandpa? And he said, yeah, sure. So I said to my dad, what'll I do with them? And he said, you take them down to the mint, and they'll give you money. I said, will they really? And he said, yeah, go on, take them down. So I took them down to the mint, to its armory with all guards and everything. But I went to the door and told them I had these coins, and they let me in, and they took my information, and they looked at the coins, and then they said, okay, we'll let you know. And they sent me a check, you know, and I don't even remember how much it was, but I remember I got a check for all those quarters, you know, from the mint. And we got it at the dump for my grandmother.
But how old were you?
Oh, then I was probably about 10. I had to have been that old if I went downtown by myself. So I was, yeah, I had been 10.
You were 10 years old going downtown by yourself?
I probably was going downtown at 8. My mother did not like to shop, and so she taught me how to take the bus very early. She taught me how to do that. And then I would take my brother down, and I would do our school shopping. She would give me the money. Can you believe this? She would give me the money, and I would go downtown, and I got to be quite a shopper. And I would, you know, buy our school supplies and buy the things she told me I was supposed to buy, and then I'd bring it home. She did not like to do that kind of stuff, and so she taught me how to do it very early, and she just let me do it.
So was this, what, the 40s?
Well, let's see. If I was born in 41, so I was probably about 8, so 49, 50.
You were born in 41?
Mm-hmm.
But you were born before that.
No, let's not make me any older than I am. I'm 76. I'm only 76.
Okay, great. Yeah. Then tell me about Susan's mother.
Oh, my grandma. I love my grandma.
Yeah, what's her full name? Do you know her maiden name?
Yeah, Martinez. Sally Martinez. And she was Mexican. That whole combination of the Indian and the Mexican that you have down there. When I did the heritage thing, it was very obvious because that came out really strong. The Indian and that's what it says Indian on it, but what it is really that mixture of the Spaniard, the mixture, because when Mexico was so close to New Mexico and all of those, that's the intermixtion that happened there. They don't call them Indians, but that's what it is. And anyway, yeah, my grandma, she made the best tortillas in the world. She would make me vermicelli because I absolutely loved it. And I just loved everything. And she used to make homemade rolls at Thanksgiving time that were just luscious. All my memories of my grandmother, was very tall. I think she was probably as tall as my grandfather, you know, which meant she was probably 5'7", 5'8", you know, she's tall. And she was very slender. She was very vain about her hair. She had curly hair, black hair, but she dyed it because very early, like several of us, she started getting white hair right in through here, and there was no way. So she died. She died. So much so that when she died, my Aunt Isabel went in and dyed her hair.
I remember that story.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
Yeah, it is a good story. That's my Aunt Isabel again, because she was just so sweet and so caring. But my, I can't remember anything bad to tell you about my grandmother. She was just.
Well, tell me something good.
She was nice.
I'm not here to hear the bad. I'm just here to get to know them.
No, I know. She was. I can't ever remember. No matter how early we got up, she was always up before us. She was always dressed in a dress, because women did not wear pants then. She was in a dress. She had her apron on. She was all ready for the day. I can't remember her dusting or vacuuming, but the house was always neat as a pin. Always neat as a pin. And she taught her daughters to do that, because my mother was a perfectionist when it came to house cleaning. So I know that was true, that she taught them all to do that. And she was, we would go, and when we go on Saturday, sometimes we'd get to spend the night with Grandma. And we get to spend the night with Grandma. She'd let us wear her nightgowns. And she had really pretty nightgowns. And of course they were way too long for Clara and I, but it didn't matter. We'd just pick them up and be, because it was fun to wear her nightgowns. And she'd let us wear all of her jewelry. She'd have all this costume jewelry. And we could put it all on and drape it all over the place. And she would do that. And then she would tell us scary stories at night. She'd do scary stories with all the kids. All the kids would be in this one bedroom, this huge bedroom that had, I think it had 2 or 3 beds in it. I remember there were 2 full beds in it. But we would all be sleeping on the one bed, and Grandma would be on the other bed, and she'd be telling us these ghost stories. And, it's just, I could draw you a diagram of the house right now. I was in that house so much, and I just have nothing but pleasant memories. She had a wood stove. They had a wood stove in the kitchen. It was kind of diagonal, so there was room in the back, and we would sit in the back. And there would be pillows in the back, and it was so warm and toasty back there, And I remember Clara and I making onion sandwiches. I can't stand that now, but we used to make, onion sandwiches, and we just loved them, and we would make those. And Grandma was just always there, and she was always. When she got sick, it was really, really hard on everybody, because she really was the glue that held that family together. And she didn't tell. She got cancer, and she told everybody she had an ulcer. That's why she had to go to the hospital. She had an ulcer. It wasn't true. But when it got so bad that she couldn't hide it anymore, then it came out. And when she couldn't take care of herself anymore, it was my Aunt Isabel. She went to live with my Aunt Isabel in their front room, and the bed was there. It was right next door. So I would go over and see her. And I would go over and talk to her and see her, And it was really hard to see my grandma that sick, because she had always been so vibrant in my life. And so, so it's really hard to see her like that. And she was.
How old were you then?
Well, I was 18.
Uh-huh.
Because it was right about the time I was graduating. So I was 17. I was probably 17, because I graduated when I was 17. Uh-huh. And she, it was really hard for me when she died. I took it really hard. I really remember that was a really hard thing for me to go through.
And she died before your grandfather?
Oh, way before my grandfather. My grandfather was 92. My grandmother was probably maybe in her 60s, but early 60s. She was not very old at all.
Uh-huh.
And, like I said, I have just nothing but nice memories of her. And she was always there for me. And my mother, too. When my mother was so sick, I remember that she came to our house to take care of us for a part of that time. Anyway, that's my grandma.
Well, how about your father's side of the family?
Don't know. Can't tell you. Never met him. My dad was raised in an orphanage, and his father, when his mother died when he was very young, and his father was taking care of him, and of course wasn't sending him to school, and they eventually caught up with him. And at that point, when they did catch up with him, apparently he put him into this Catholic, it's an orphanage, technically, that's what it was. And it was run by priests, so it was probably boys. just boys. And this was in Nebraska, and that's where he was raised. And he learned. He tried to find his father when he got older. And when his father died, they found my dad, and because he had all the papers, he kept all the papers. But he was in.
What do you mean they found him? Who found him?
The neighbors. He just passed away. I mean, just
Okay.
Natural death. But he lived in Lusk, Wyoming, so he's very close to us. That's not very far away. And when my dad went back to bury him, and my mother and dad went back, and they told him, when my dad walked in, they said, "Oh, we know you really look like his dad. You really look like his dad." And it hurt my dad that he didn't find him before. I think he really loved him. And he would love to have moved to Lusk, Wyoming, because he had a big ranch there. Now, the house was nothing to, he lived very meagerly, because he was alone and he didn't care, and he took care of his stuff, his business, and he was kind of a loner, and he kind of, stayed by himself. And that was the stories that the people around there told my dad. And so, but my dad would have loved to have gone there. He told my mother, I'll build you a big house and everything, if you'll move here. She said, I'm not going to be stuck in the middle of Wyoming with the storms and not getting out in the winter. And she was used to the city. She didn't want any part of it. So he sold it all. But he teased my mother for a long time because apparently his birthday was off.
His birthday was off?
Yeah, it was the wrong month, the wrong day. When he got the papers in there had his birth certificate on it, and it wasn't even, his name was different. It was Oliver something or another. And I said, "Oh my God!" And
was it the right birth certificate?
Yeah, it was really weird. But anyway, he used to tease my mother and he said, "I'm probably younger than you." She didn't like that kind of thing. She didn't like to be teased like that. So anyway, but his family, a few of them came once in a while. He had some aunts who still lived in Nebraska, and they would come by. So they were around, but they were never real friendly. They never came often. We never got to know them a lot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just remember a couple of them.
What can you tell me about his life growing up? How did he end up in Denver?
After the service, he was a ranger during World War II. And not that he tell you this story, because I've learned it bits and pieces over the years, because people in World War II never talked about that. They never talked about that. But my dad was a ranger, and he was there when they landed on Normandy Beach, one of the first ones, And but he just wouldn't talk about the war. But he had really strong feelings about it, because he caught malaria in Africa, because he was over there for part of the tour. They were over there part of the time. And then he was in Italy when they hung Mussolini. So he doesn't like Italians. And I'm serious. He would tell me, I said, "Dad, you can't, all Italians aren't that way." And he would say, they were friends with him up until the time that they were losing the war, and then they hung him. He said, "Can't trust Italians." My father made statements like that, and he meant them. It was like, whoa. One time when I think it was Joe, when we went back one time, and he was taking us through some neighborhoods, and he said, "Now all of the Jews live in this neighborhood." I said, "Dad, not all the Jews live in this neighborhood." And he said, "Well, most of them." And I said, you can't be that sweepingly about Jews. And, yeah, they do. He said, and my mother said, well, he argues with them all the time if we go into stores. He said, they like to argue. It's perfectly okay to argue, but they like to argue. So he had very kind of those kinds of set things about it, But, yeah, he was an interesting man. He had a very dry sense of humor. But I'm telling you that he's the one that kept the family together. When he died and Bobby and I went through his stuff, he kept all those things. He had my brownie card from when I was in Girl Scouts. He had my hat. He had this letter I'd left him. He had my brother's christening dress in there, things like that. And I said to my mother when we were opening this stuff up, I said, did you know that Dad had this stuff? And this is stuff you would expect your mother to keep, not your dad. But my dad kept it. And I realized after he died that he was the one that always instigated the phone calls. I would get phone calls, at least monthly. And it was always my dad on the phone, and he would always say, so how's the weather? He wouldn't say hello. How's the weather? So we talk about the weather, and then he'd say, your mom wants to talk to you. And he'd get the phone to my mom. I'd hear about the weather, and then I had to talk to my mom.
I would get the same kind of phone calls.
From who?
From him.
From my dad?
Uh-huh.
Really? I didn't know he called you.
Oh, only a handful of times,
Yeah.
but that's exactly how it went.
See?
How's the weather? Here's your grandma.
Yeah, he did that all the time. And I would say, I love you, Dad. Mm-hmm. He'd say, wasn't demonstrative at all. As a matter of fact, when he got sick, it was the hardest thing for me because I had gone back. My brother finally said, come home. So I went home knowing that he was dying. And my brother picked me up at the airport, and he said, we have to go pick up Dad. He's at the hospital there. He was swollen, and they were draining the water off of his stomach. And so he had to stay overnight when they did that, so that we were picking him up. And I went up to see him. My brother said, go get him. He'll be waiting at the door. And I'm not going to park. I'm just going to go and walk. I said, okay. And so I went up to see him, and I could see how sick he was. And my dad had he just wasn't sick. I can't remember a time my dad even had a cold. He was just that kind of healthy person, never heavy or, always just the same. And so it struck me, and I was trying not to. Anyway, we both started crying, and my dad was actually crying, and I just don't remember ever seeing my father cry, so it was very emotional. It was very hard. But that was the end of it. We cried, and then he hugged me, and we got in the car. And then after we got home, he started telling me what had to be done. This is where this is. Don't let your brother do this. These are worth more than he knows, and that kind of thing. He did all of that with me. That's when he gave me the watch for you, and he gave me the camera for Chris. And he gave me the blanket for Jeffrey, and you don't think about it, but it's very thoughtful. But he never wanted you to think he was thoughtful. I don't think that's what he wanted you to think, but he was. He was very good about things like that. And I was telling you about the shopping, and one of my stories about my mother with shopping is that when your dad was sick and we were living with them in the basement, I said to her, I can go to the base and buy you food, so just make me a list and I'll buy you whatever you need, And she said, yeah, okay. Well, I didn't get a list, and I didn't get a list. I kept saying, Mother, make me a list. And she said, oh, whatever, Gloria, just buy me whatever. And I said, no, that's not going to work, Mother. I don't cook the same things you cook. I don't, you have to tell me. And finally I said to my dad, Dad, she won't give me a list. And he started laughing. He said, I don't know why you asked her for a lift. Your mother never goes shopping for groceries. I do all the grocery shopping. So he made me a list. But he could be gruff, and he could be, he complained a lot during the time we were there because Chris got sick and was very fretty and crying, and his babies were crying and keeping him awake, and he had to go to work the next day and stuff like that. It was like, oh, give me a break. I have a dying husband and 3 small kids, and you're not worried about losing a little sleep. I'm sorry, So he could be unthinking sometimes, but there were more good things about him, and those are the things I want to remember.
So his name Morehouse. Did he have
Welch? His father was Indian and Welch. So my dad said.
Welch?
Welch. That's what Morehouse is. It's Welch.
You mean like English Welsh?
Wales.
Wales.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear the story how Robert and Susan got together?
Yeah. Yeah. He met her at some gathering of some sorts that she was at, that people were at, and began to date her. And at that point, she wanted nothing to do with him. For one thing, she said he drank, and so he said, "Okay, I won't drink." So he stopped drinking, just like that. And that was my father. When he said he was going to stop smoking, he stopped smoking, and that was the end of it. He just stopped. To have that kind of willpower, not me.
When did he stop?
When he stopped what?
Smoking. He always smoked pipe.
Oh, he smoked a pipe. But
that's smoking.
Yeah. No, he smoked cigarettes. He smoked Chesterfield cigarettes for most of his life, and he smoked like 2 or 3 packs a day.
Okay.
And him and my Uncle Frank had this bet going, and it was Lent. And him and my Uncle Frank had this bet going, and they both wanted to quit. And so my dad said, well, we'll do it together, and we'll do it in Lent. And my uncle said, okay. And he thought, he can do it, I can do it, right? Mm-hmm. My dad did it, and never picked up another cigarette. It was years later he started smoking a pipe, and then, I like this. And it's so mad, I had his pipe, and somebody, when they broke into the house, they stole his pipe. I was so mad, Not that I was ever going to smoke it. It was the idea that it was my dad's, and I wanted it. My mother had told me I could have it, so I'd taken it.
Sure.
So anyway.
Okay, so they dated and then got married, and.
Well, there's more to this whole story. He's really not my biological father. He's my stepfather. And but my brother and I. There's 2 of us, and it's really involved. But her first husband, who was the man who gave her tuberculosis, my mother had tuberculosis when she was young, he was in the service of some sort. I don't know what he was in. I don't know if he was in the army or what. His name is Leonard. And my brother's name was Leonard too, but his name is Leonard. And she married him, and then he adopted me, because you obviously know that I didn't belong to him, because they came to Denver when she was going to have me. So Leonard adopted me, and then she had Leonard, my brother, okay? And then that's when she bought the house we lived in, was when she was still married to him. And we lived in the west side, the north side of Denver. And then she got tuberculosis from him. And
Susan got tuberculosis.
Yeah, my mother had tuberculosis.
I didn't know.
Yeah, and she was really, she was never an active case, which meant she could not technically give it to you because she wasn't that, but she got it that way. But they were always worried about it because it could change really rapidly. So I was 4. And I remember this distinctly because of the timeline. But she had divorced him, and we were still living in the house. But he would get drunk, and he would come and raise hell. And I would go to the neighbors and tell them to call the police because he was hurting my mother. Okay?
You were doing that
I was 4.
at 4.
My mother gave me much too much responsibility, way too young. But she did. And then she complained later that, I was too independent. And it was like, oh, God. But yeah, because, one of my early memories is that they would tell me if she falls, because she often would faint, you get the cloth, I would get a washcloth with cold water and put it on her head, and then they showed me who to dial, who to call to get her help. So I knew how to do that. I was 4.
And who showed you that?
My grandmother, because we didn't live close to my grandparents. We lived clear across town.
Okay, so this wasn't the house on Zuni. This was in
Yeah.
the north end?
Yeah, we're in the
I thought Zuni was on the east end.
Oh, no, that Zuni is the one Mother lived in before she died. I lived at 2449 West 29th, which was just down the street from there. Okay, the bottom of the hill. Couldn't draw your map. I knew that house very well. So yeah, we lived in that house, and it was a straight shot. You come in the living room, it had great big French doors, and you went into the dining room, which was eventually made into a bedroom for us. Went into another bedroom, went into the kitchen. That was it. Bathroom was off the kitchen, pantry was over here, back porch was there. So that was the house. It had a full basement. Eventually, my father dug out the full basement and built rooms down there. So then I moved downstairs. But for years.
Now, this is the house where you grew up.
Where I grew up, 2449. I have pictures. I took that too. I said, Mother, this is my house. I'm taking a picture.
So who grew up in that house? Who were the people who were in that house?
Me and my brother Leonard. The girls were born, but they moved shortly after that to the house on Zuni, so that's the house they know as children. But they were born in the house 2449, all of them. Sally was a baby. Because I took you back one time. I took you back because I must not have left. You must not have moved out of town yet. But anyway, for whatever reason, you were a baby, and I went over there, and they were eating, and Sally was messing around, and I scolded her, and she said, first of all, she said, did you bring the baby? And I said, yes. And she said, what can he do? And I said, what do you mean, what can he do? Well, does he walk, or does he talk, or does he do anything? I said, no, not yet. And she said, well, what a dud, She wasn't very impressed, And so then she said to me, so I scolded her about something she was doing, and she was mad, and I could tell she was mad, and she was trying to think of what to do. And then finally she turned around and looked at me, and she said, well, my dad can beat your dad up. Same guy, kid. But she can get it because I had not been there. Do you see what I mean? All the time she was little, I was never in that house. I just came to visit. So she never thought of me till I got older. I was just a visitor, And so, but what was my point? I was trying to make a point about my dad about that. I can remember telling my dad that I was angry because I said, you would never let us do this. If we didn't eat what Mother cooked, we didn't eat. That was the rule. My mother was a short order cook when it came to her younger kids. She cooked whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. And I said, what is this all about? To my dad. And he said, you just get old, Gloria. You just get old. And I didn't realize that till I had my children, and when it came to Jared and Jody, it was like, yeah, you just get tired. Who cares? You get tired, But yeah.
Okay, so you grew up in that house.
I grew up in that house.
With
I was telling you about Mother and tuberculosis. So she's 24. So I was 4, and so they finally decided they were going to put her in a sanitarium, and so they wanted to put her in a sanitarium for a year.
Who decided this?
The doctors. Her doctors decided that to get rid of the tuberculosis altogether, that she needed to go to a sanitarium. That's how they used to treat it, with special, they fed you certain things. I don't know. It's a lot, but that's how they treated it then. And she was to go into the sanitarium. So she put me in an orphanage, and she put my brother in a foster home. Now, as an adult, I now think that what the deal was that she couldn't get us both in a foster home, so she opted to let me go into the orphanage, and so for a year I was in this orphanage, and I remember I had lots of hair, and it was heavy, and so the nuns would always have the older girls braid my hair because that would keep it still, because it was fairly curly. So it was
how old were you?
4. The only reason I remember that is that when I got out of there is when I started kindergarten. That's the only reason I know I was 4, when I was in the orphanage for a year. And the traumatic things about that were, I was always really very frightened. I was not a real outgoing kid. I was pretty, I wasn't used to being around a lot of kids except for my cousins, my aunts and uncles. I mean, those people. And at that point, my aunt and uncles didn't have kids. They came much later. And so I was, so it was pretty intimidating. And I saw my mother one time, that whole year. And I remember very vividly because it was Bob who came and got me to take me to visit her. And she was at my grandma's house, and she was visiting too. She was on leave, kind of, they'd let her out for the weekend kind of thing. And I went over to my grandparents' place, and she was there. And so when it was time for me to go back, of course, I started crying. And she said, "I told you not to bring her. I told you she would cry." Not trying to smooth me out or trying to make me feel good. Just, "I told you." And man, I didn't cry again. So I went back, and I saw my brother one time. We were up in the mountains. They had taken us up in the mountains for an outing. And we were obviously in a public place, and I saw my brother with his family, and I went over there. And
just a coincidence?
Yeah, it was just a coincidence that they happened to be up there at the same time as we were. But he started crying, and he would, because he didn't want to let go of me because he knew who I was, and it was like, oh God, this is, So I smoothed that one out, and I didn't cry, and then I, went back. But there were nuns where I was, so that's why I was Catholic, and I got in trouble because I would be late for Mass. But it was the girls' fault because they were braiding my hair and they'd take their darn sweet time. And it wasn't my fault if my hair wasn't done on time. So I was late for Mass. But anyway, those are the memories I have of the orphanage. And then when I came home from the orphanage, I found out my brother had been home for a week before I got home. And I said, "Why?" And nobody would give me an answer. Nobody said anything to me. And it's really strange. They gave me all this responsibility, yet when it came to things like that, they never would tell me things. And I realize now it was probably because it was easier to get him out of foster care than it was to get me out of the orphanage. But, when you're 4, you don't know that. And so you keep wondering why in the world you weren't good enough to be able to get out at the same time. So my mother didn't build up any points with me. But sorry, she really didn't. But anyway, yeah.
Okay, so she recovered from tuberculosis.
She recovered in that, but it would come out a lot of ways. She one time I remember she got boils on her leg, and they would, like big boils, and then they would pop. And the doctor said it was because of the tuberculosis, So she had lots of side effects that hampered her for years because of the tuberculosis. But basically, no, she never, but they would test us. We used to have to get x-rays then all the time to make sure we didn't have it. And Mother was, she was very clean anyway. You could eat off my mother's floors. But she was doubly so. Like, she had her own wash rag and you couldn't touch it and things like that. And we were taught that very early. You stay away from these things. These are mine. You don't do that. So, okay. So, yeah.
So when did Robert enter the picture?
After she came out of the sanitarium, he actually lived in the house while she was in the sanitarium, and he paid the rent to keep the house so she wouldn't lose it all the time that she was in the sanitarium.
Okay, I need a clarification then. Why did you two go to orphanage and foster care if Robert was living in the house?
Well,
were they not married at the time?
No,
Oh,
they weren't
okay.
married. They weren't married.
Okay.
No. He was trying to marry her, but she wouldn't marry him. No, seriously, she didn't want to marry again. And she didn't mind living with him. She didn't mind him taking care of things, but she didn't really want to marry him. And it was very much later. You remember that my brother Bobby was born 10 years later. And they were together all of that time before he was born. So no, it wasn't Bob. I mean, he would have married her in a second. I don't know why, but he did. He loved her. And I never questioned that. He loved her. But she didn't want to get married. And so she didn't for a long time. And I don't, maybe she was pregnant and she knew she was pregnant and they got married. But I don't think so. I think they got married before that. Because I know I've seen pictures of them when they got married. I think I have some, but I can't remember where I've seen them. Anyway, I remember them getting married, and they got married in the church. And it ain't that easy to get married in the Catholic Church, so they had to go through some stuff. Okay, so they got married, and then it was after that, and Mother had had her tubes tied, so she didn't think she'd ever have any children. She didn't care, and I think she just thought, he's willing to help me raise these kids, and he's good with them, and so why not? And he was very good with this. And so, she, then she got pregnant, and the doctor said, no, it's a tumor, and she said, no, it's for real. So anyway, she had my brother, who weighed almost 10 pounds. He was huge, and I mean, he was like, it was a full-grown child sitting out there, and of course he was a baby.
That was Bobby.
Yeah, it was Bobby. He was such a pretty baby. And then she had Christine. I told you that's when my uncle died. She was pregnant with Christine when my uncle Leo died. Mm-hmm. And then she had a miscarriage. And then she had Sandy. And when she had Sandy, she didn't realize they had given her a transfusion because she had been so sick. She had a lot of complications after this miscarriage. And they had given her a transfusion. And so when Sandy was born, her blood was all screwed up. And so they rushed her to Children's Hospital. They didn't think she'd make it. And they literally had to change all of her blood. But she pulled through. But she was in it. If she was in the hospital that year, my mother was in the hospital that year. Between the two of them, they were in and out of the hospital. And when we'd have to go get Sandy at the hospital, I would go in and get her dressed and bring her out to Dad, and we'd take her to Aunt Rosie. And she stayed with my Aunt Rosie for lots of those months when my mother was so ill. And so, and I know that my mother almost died then. She had pneumonia, and they took her in the hospital, and she's allergic to penicillin and she's allergic to sulfur, the two things you use to bring down fever and that. So they packed her in ice. They literally packed her in ice to bring the fever down. And they did bring the fever down. And she tells the story that she was climbing the mountain and she could see her brother. Leo was at the top of the mountain. And she kept saying, Leo, help me. I want to come up. Help me.
Was she hallucinating?
Not according to my mother. I mean, it's not like they said somebody told the story, they heard her talking. She's told the story after she was well. And she said she saw her brother and he was at the top of the hill. And she asked him to help her and he wouldn't help her. He said, you go back. Go back. So it's like, we're not ready for you yet. Go back. because she wanted to go to her brother. But anyway, true or not, it's one of those things. But she got well, and then she had Sally eventually. And Sally's about 2 or 3 years younger than.
Sally's my age.
Yeah. She's 2 years older than you, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's 2 or 3 years younger than Sally. Yeah. So then she was born. So yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you know much of your father?
My real father? Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. And you know that there again, so you have to ask questions when there are people around to tell you. My Aunt Rosie one time said to me that, because I told you she was mad that they had to move to Denver because my mother was pregnant, and she said my father looked like, I'm trying to think who he was now. God, now I've forgotten. Maybe I'll remember later. But she gave me a picture of him. Not a real picture, but in my mind, had a picture of him in my mind. And the story is that mother got pregnant, and when my grandparents went to the house to talk to the family about it, they didn't say anything, but they immediately signed him up and got him out of town, and he went into the service. So that he wouldn't marry my mother. I don't know. I'm just telling you what they said. But obviously it was, she did get pregnant and she was in disgrace. And so in Watrous, it's a block long, so everybody had to know. So that's why they went to Denver. Actually, their lives were better in Denver than they would have been in Watrous. That's a little tiny town,
Okay, then where did Leonard come from?
She must have met him somewhere. I really don't know the story about how she married Leonard, how she met him. I just know she was married to him and that he was in the service, and then they got a divorce, and that she got TB from. Those are the things I know about him. I saw him several other times during my life, because of course he was my brother's father, real father, and he would always promise my brother things. He would tell him he was coming and he was going to bring him this and he would bring him that. He never came through. He was a jerk. I mean, he really was a jerk. And that's just what I felt about him. And so people would say, well, yeah, but. And I'd say, no, Bob was there. He was the one that listened to me. He was the one that was there when I needed a father. He was always there. So I don't care what anybody says. He's my father. Very proud. But no, I did ask my mother one time what his name was, and she did tell me. And like an idiot, I didn't write it down. And it must not. I always think that if those things are important to you, you'll remember them or you'll write them down somewhere so you won't forget. And I didn't either. So it says to me, I didn't really care enough to do it. I guess. That's just me.
Okay. Can you tell me about your brother?
My brother Leonard?
Uh-huh.
We were real close. We were 2 years in difference in age. He was 2 years younger than I was.
How many years?
2.
2.
2. And we called him Sonny. Nobody called him Leonard. They called him Sonny.
Why, like Sonny Boy? Or was there something
Sonny,
more to it?
No. That's all I know. We always called him Sonny. And Sonny, Sonny, that way. And she, and I think he was spoiled rotten. Well, I do, he was my mother's son. She's always been more fond of her sons than she has her daughters. I'm sorry. And it's not just me. I mean, it's all of her daughters, And I think maybe Sally was the exception. That's why it's so sad that Sally's the one that got sick, because I think, it would have been better with Sally around. But anyway, it is what it is. But we were real close. We did everything together. We went, we went to Catholic school. We played. There were nothing but boys in the neighborhood, so there was a big vacant lot across the street where we grew up, and we would build forts. We would dig out great big holes and then find all the loose wood and everything all over the place. And those were summers, and you would do that kind of stuff, or you'd go up to the park and you'd play on the playground.
That sounds real familiar.
Yeah, you'd play on the playground, and there was you could slide. It was like a tin roof, so you could slide from the top of the roof all the way down. It was kind of spooky, and it wasn't probably very safe, but the guys would dare me to do it. Oh, Gloria won't do that. Well, didn't like to be dared, so she would do it, and she'd be scared out of her mind, but she'd do it. It's like, who could climb the highest up the side of the building and jump off, and I'd do all that stuff. I had more bruises than anybody. I was one massive bruise from top to bottom. And my mother would say, "Oh, you're gonna." I didn't care. And I remember one time I was late coming home, and I was at the playground, and I was supposed to be home, and so I was running across the street, and I lost my footing, and this hill, there's like a dirt hill all the way down, just came down like that, steep down like that, and I slid all the way down. And so I limped into the house and went into the bathroom, and I was a mess. I'd really just ripped it all up, and so I just took care of it and didn't tell my mother, because I already got in trouble, so I wasn't supposed to be doing that anyway. So,
And
but
so you were doing this with your brother then?
That time I wasn't with him, but most of the time, yes. Him and the boys in the neighborhood. That's who I played with, and we built forts and traded comic books until one time we got bed bugs because there were some in the comic books, and then my mother was furious, so we weren't allowed to ever trade comic books again because she took all the beds out and to fumigate them all. It was quite an ordeal, and we got in lots of trouble, so we weren't allowed to trade comic books anymore. But
what were some of your favorite comic books?
I don't really remember that. I think like Archie and stuff like that. I remember Archie because that was pretty popular. I wasn't into Superman or those kinds of things, but I was into a lot of the Archies and the Betty and that kind of stuff. The park, there were lots of things at the park, at the city park. All my grandma's, we used to go there a lot, and they had a swimming pool there, so we'd go swimming, and as well as a huge park, just a huge park. And there'd be baseball games going on, so we could stay on lots of baseball games, I just remember that we would leave the house, and we would maybe be gone all day long, and nobody ever looked for us. It was like, it was the neighborhood kids, and we were all gone, But nobody was out there hollering, "Where were you?" or checking on you to see where you'd gone or anything like that. And I was telling a story not long ago about the fact that I remember we had wandered off, and I know the distance now because I'm an adult and I know, but we had walked a long, long ways to get down to the railroad tracks and the trestles, and we were up on the trestles, and the guys were saying, "We should have a rope, so if the train comes by, we could throw you over the side and then you would survive." Kids, And then we ended up in this neighborhood that we did not know, but I, of course, know now. And it was quite a distance from the house, but it was a Catholic church, and we were all Catholics, so we were going to go in to pray that we would find our way home, right? But I couldn't go in because I didn't have a scarf, and so I had to stand in the vestibule, and all the boys went in to pray, and my brother was funny. He was charming. He was good looking. He was tall, and he was, I could tell him anything, and he, would keep. But he ran away from home very early, and again, I blame my mother for that. And it had to do with my dad. His dad, and my dad, and she would feed him stories about Leonard, and and say he didn't have to mind Bob and stuff like that to undermine their relationship. She really did do things like that, and I never could figure out why she did it, but she did it. And then my brother found out about her little affairs. My mother had lots of little affairs, and we never talked about it. You know how that is. Something's going on in the family. You don't necessarily talk about it. You assume you all know it, but you don't talk about it. You know. And I didn't talk about it. And but the family all knew. And one time he had run away, and nobody knew where he was. And I was over at Michael Frank's, and he came in the back door. And he said to me, "Did you know about that?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "I didn't know you didn't know. I assumed I knew it. You weren't that much younger than I was. I assumed you knew it too." And he said, "I didn't." And so he was really mad at her. He was really angry with her.
And how old was he then?
Well, we were both probably in about middle school. So what? Yeah, somewhere in through there when he started running away. And he ended up in a lot of, I mean, you know, at that point they didn't used to put you in. They used to put you in like detention, but they weren't bad places. They were, you know, they were trying to get kids out of there in good shape, not teach them to be criminals. My brother didn't turn into a criminal, but he was never home again. He never lived at home again, you know. And so anyway, he was mad at me because of all of this, and it was like, "I thought you knew." And he said, "Well, I didn't, and you should have told me." And it was just, you know. But when he'd end up in these places, I would write him letters, and I would always scold him. I would always say, you know, you need to pick up your life and forget about it. I mean, you know, you can't let her control everything. That, you know, no matter what she did, it has nothing to do with you. Blah blah blah. You know, I give, you know, those kinds of things. And he would write me back, and he would say, "You know, I'd love to get letters from you, but I hate to get all of them. I'm tired of you telling, you know, always scolding me about the one thing or another." And I said, and I kept saying, "I don't care. I'm going to keep on scolding you because I love you and I want you to be okay."
So where are these places that he was staying? Were these foster homes?
Well, no. This was like a group home. It was like a group home that he was placed in by the courts when they found him.
So you knew where he was, so you knew there was an address.
He was dead. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we didn't, because sometimes he was just staying with buddies. You know how that goes. You know, he would stay with people for a while, and then he'd move on and stay with other people for a while. But eventually would get caught, usually because, you know, he wasn't in school and they'd catch him in the park or something like that. And then they put him in these detention homes, and he'd be there for a while. But he never came home. I'll tell you that. But then he joined the service, and things changed a lot. And he decided to go into the service, and him and I guess maybe they had something to talk about. I don't know, but their relationship changed a lot. And my dad and my brother got so he was very fond of my dad at the end. And then he went to France, and that's where he was stationed. And I used to write him all the time. By then I was living up here, and I would write him, and he would write me, and I have, you know, letters from him and stuff like that. And
so this was in the 50s.
Closer to 60s, because you had been born, so it was 60s or.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 60s, because you had been born when he died. Yeah. You were a baby when we went back to baby, and he was in a car accident. They had gone into one of the little French towns drinking with a bunch of other guys. And they'd been drinking. And they were going back to the base, and it was icy. It was winter. It was icy. And the guy lost control of the car and crashed it. And my brother was thrown out of the car. And they said it was exposure. His injuries weren't really that bad, but they didn't find him until the next day. And by the time they got him to the hospital, the exposure had done all the damage, and he died because of that. And then they shipped him home. And it takes a long time if you're in Europe for them to ship him home. It's not, you know, it's not over. So of course my mother called me and said, "Come home," and so we did go home. Came home the funeral, and my mother and I got into a big thing because, she, things happen. Like when her brother died. I mean, at the funeral there, it was absolutely a disaster trying to keep her from getting into the grave. It was just, she can be very dramatic like that and carry on. And it was like, oh, mother, please. Well, she did the same thing with my brother. She kept carrying on. And it upset me because I know it was her son, and it had to be hard to lose your son. But the rest of us were suffering too. I mean, we were really close, and it really, really hurt, But no consideration there. And my dad said to me, your mother really is. And I got so mad at him that I said to Denny, we're leaving. And I packed our stuff and we left, and we didn't go back. And I didn't talk to her for probably a year and a half, And because I felt like, she was the only one suffering. And I realized it hurt, but come on, other people hurt too. And it was rough. I couldn't read letters for years. I kept all his letters and everything, but I couldn't read them. I would find myself thinking about things I wanted to tell him, and I would sit down to write him, and then I'd remember, and it was all over again. So in the basement of the house that we lived in, I had one of the little cabinets had all of his letters. It had a shoebox, and all of his letters and things that I had from him were in there. And it wasn't until I moved out of the house that I finally sat down and read those letters. So it was pretty hard. And he was pretty young,
So, can you tell me about your other brother?
Brother Bobby. That awful grown man, we called him Bobby until the day he died, I think. Again, we were pretty close. He was 10 years younger than I was, so I wasn't there for a lot of things, but I lived in town enough that I would go back, and he would, he had a stutter. He stuttered for a long part of his life, and
I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, he really did. And
yeah, he would.
What?
I remember that.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, now that you mentioned, I've forgotten that. I mean,
well, he didn't later in life. He didn't at all. But younger he did, and you guys knew him when he was younger. And he was a sweet kid. Very caring. But Mother,
keep going.
Mother, again, she didn't want to acknowledge when she had problems with her children of any sort. I mean, she just wouldn't acknowledge that kind of thing. And my brother, and he wasn't a complainer. He wouldn't say much, but I went to a couple of his school conferences. Can you imagine? I was going to his school conferences. My mother never went to school conferences, but I went to his school conferences, and they would say, he really needs some help with this or that. And I'd go home, and I'd berate her and say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. But she never would do it. She was a good mother. So she didn't do it. And like my other brother, because I had always bought Leonard's clothes and everything, he would, when it came time to buy things, he would call me and he would say, will you go shopping with me? Well, yeah, I'd go shopping with him because I was used to going shopping with him. Well, Bobby didn't do that, but when Bobby was worried about something or didn't quite understand how to take things, he would call me. By then, I was living up here, and he would call, and it really hurt because I knew what he was going through. I knew how he felt, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. I mean, I would say, it is what it is, and Dad knows, and he chooses to to live that way, so it's not our choice, you know. So we need to respect that and move on. And but it's hard to do. It's very hard to do. And so he, that's why when he had the opportunity to come up to be with us, he jumped at it. I think he just wanted to get out of there for a while. And it was kind of good for him, but it was kind of bad for him because by then he already knew his wife, and telephone bills were atrocious. I had put locks on the phones because he was calling her all the time, and I couldn't afford the phone bill. And
I remember.
It was long distance then. And
oh, he was a lot of fun. He'd steal your car. He would always running up the phone bill.
But he loved you guys, and he, you know, when I wasn't there, he would take care of you, and you know, stuff like that. So I mean,
well, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I got the whole idea of, oh, you could actually talk back to Mom the way Bobby does. That's where that whole idea came from. Him standing up to you, I was like, oh, I didn't even think that was an option that was available. Until I saw him doing it.
Another thing I could help. You know. But yeah, I loved him. He was, you know, we got closer and closer as we got older and older. And I would call him often, and you know, and he would call me and give me a bad time, but also, you know, we were close. You know, and of course, because we shared a lot of childhood memories, even though we were doing it at different levels in our life, we understood that. And it was always hard for Ernestine because she, you know, we couldn't ever get him to. He said, I would go there to visit, and I'd say, I'm going to go see your mom. And he'd say, she's not my mom, she's your mom. I'm adopted. Remember, I'm the adopted one. It's your mom. So we'd go on, and Ernestine would get so mad because she was so close with her mother, she couldn't understand it at all. And I thought it was weird. I would go home, I would go to see my mother, and of course she knew I was staying with my brother, and she'd say, how's my son? And I'd say, Mother, he lives 12 blocks away from you. I live in Washington. You should know how your son is, you know. And when he was sick, even she didn't make the effort to go see him or call him, you know. And at the end, when she really wanted to see him, and I said to him, she really wants to see you, and he said, no, can't do it. And I said, Bobby, I'll take you over, so then when you get tired of it, we can just leave, you know. Just see her, and then we'll leave. And he said, I can't do it. He said, because she'll say something about my family, and I won't be able to handle it, and I'll say something nasty back. And he said, I just don't want it to end like that. So he wouldn't go see her. It's sad. It's really sad. So.
What about your sister Christine?
Oh my God. Okay, well, you got to remember that I wasn't home, so I don't really know much about. I can only tell you what I was told. Christina is another one who ran away from home very, very early. Christina, as far as I'm concerned, is the most like my mother, except she's mean, and my mother wasn't really mean. And I don't know why she ran away. I mean, she never has said, but she lived with other people, and she lived on the streets most of her life. I think she left home when she was probably 13 or 14. I'm serious. She had been gone that long. And it was after she was married and started to have kids that she finally bridged something with my parents and began to come back. But my father spent a lot of nights in the car looking for her and that kind of thing. And he couldn't find her. And then she.
Do you know why she left? Why she was running away?
That's what I said. And Dad never knew either, or if he did, he never told me. He would just say she's gone again, and I don't know where she is, and I don't know what she's doing, and and she really got into this whole gang thing and had that whole lifestyle. I never heard and I never suspected that she did drugs. Now, my sister Sandra was into drugs, but I don't think Christina was. I mean, I think she sold them, and that I do, but I don't think she was into them. Do you know what I mean? You know, yeah. But no, I don't know why she ran away. I have no idea. I just know that my dad said she ran away, and that he couldn't find her, and you know, then he'd find her and he'd bring her home, and she'd be home for a little while, and she was gone again. So once she had figured out how to run the streets, she chose to do that rather than stay home, I think, is what it was all about. But she could be very mean. And she could be
mean to you, mean to people?
No, she was nasty to me, but, you know, just because she didn't like what I said, you know, but not really. I mean, she was never really mean to me, but you guys were there. Chris is the one that tells the story about one time you were there visiting with my parents. I'd left you there one summer, and that she had come in she beat up some guy in the driveway. Yeah, he was afraid of her too. He said, "Oh, she's mean as hell." You know, you wouldn't want to, you know, you'd want her on your side.
But she was always nice to me.
Yeah, well, yeah, she was. She was okay with me too. I mean, when I would go to visit, she was always okay with me. Jody didn't like her. Jody was mad because I guess I left her there one time with her and her kids. And Jody didn't like that at all. She complained to me. She's complained to me for years about it. So I guess I said, "Well, what happened?" Nothing happened, but leave me with those people. A different lifestyle altogether. I mean, you know, she really was different. Yeah, you know, she was a lot like my mother in that she was very self-centered, and she worried about herself. She had a daughter who died in a car accident, which was very, very tragic. And, you know, because she shouldn't even have been in that car. You know, like Christina had let her go out with these kids who were way older than she was, and they were drinking, and there was a bad car accident. She was killed. I'll never know. But so that really tore her up. And then she had her 3 sons, and again, that was her lifestyle. That's what she taught them. And so they were all in gangs, and they all got into lots of that kind of thing. And it's real sad because one of them was killed in prison. Michael wouldn't even talk to her at the end of her life. Went to the hospital and said, "This is what you deserve," and walked out the door. You know, Ernestine said it was the worst thing she'd ever seen in her life, to have somebody say that to their mother. You know. But you know, you hurt kids, and then that's what happens. I mean, they don't forget those kinds of things, and he obviously hadn't forgotten it. So that's Michael, and then the other one was still there, and he just got out of jail not too long ago, and I understand. It sounds to me like he's in that style, and he's going to stay in it. You know, Michael is out of it, has a life, you know. But Christina was a hypochondriac, and so was my mother. My mother was always sick. Every time you talked to her, she was like, "Oh God, I think you know." And she was never really. I mean, you go to the doctor, and the doctor said she's fine. You know, so it was like you almost thought it was sympathy. And I used to often say, you know, we're not going to know when she's really sick because she cries wolf so much that we don't know when she's really, really sick, you know. And, but she never got really, really sick, I don't think.
Well, how about Sandra?
Sandra was the one I had the most hope for, to be honest with you. She was very bright, and she was very inquisitive, and I liked her. I liked her a lot when she was a kid. Whenever I'd go to visit, I really enjoyed her and everything. She was my father's favorite. She looked just like his mother, and he was very fond of her. And she, turning point with all of us seemed to be when we found out my mother was having affairs. You know, Bobby had to go through his crisis at that time. That may have been what happened with Christina. I don't know. But, and we all handled it differently. It was kind of interesting. And then when Sandra went through that, she went to my dad, and I really think she thought he'd pick her, that he would pick the kids and get a divorce. And he told her it was none of her business. But my mother was somewhat concerned because she ran away. My mother left. Sandra didn't leave. My mother left. And my dad called me and said, "Is your mother up there?" He thought she'd come to Washington. And I said, "No, she'd never come here. She knows me. I mean, she knows I would be sympathetic. She wouldn't come to me, Dad. There's no way she'd come to me." And he said, "Will you call me if she comes?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll tell her if she comes, but she won't come to me, and she won't call me. She knows that I will be sympathetic." And he found her with some of his relatives in California, which was interesting. And he finally did find her, and went down, took the girls down with him, and brought her home. And that was the end of that. And then that was Sandra's downhill. She ran away, started doing drugs. Anything she could do to turn my father's hair white, she did it. You know, she was making out with some other girl in the driveway. She knew my dad could see that stuff, you know. And he went to court with her and tried to talk to her, and she was just really nasty to him. The judge even said something to her because she was so mean to my dad in court. And he literally turned gray overnight with Sandra. I mean, I think it really hurt him a lot, what she did. But and so she went into, and she was really doing drugs, a lot of drugs. And most of the guys she was with were scummy looking guys. And you'd see them, you know, it's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" You know, kind of thing. But she had a little boy. So it wasn't like she was, you know, you'd think that, but she didn't. And, you know, she has no relationship with him now either, because he said to me, you know, the only time I ever felt safe was when I went to my grandparents' home, and I stayed there. It was the only time I really felt safe. And so, yeah, there's no way I'll put my grandmother in the nursing home.
And what's his name?
Ladio.
Oh.
It's Larry. It's Larry.
Yeah, but everyone knows him as Ladio.
Yeah, yeah, but it's Larry. So anyway, that's her story, and she finally got off. She has hepatitis, so she has a disability. So, you know, she works some, but she can't work much because it really does drive her down. But she's a funny kid, and you know, I have to tell you, it was really weird because later on in life when she was calling me a lot, and it was like, I said to Bobby, I said, "Oh, this is horrible. Now I'm going through this again." She's now going through what we went through when we were younger. She's doing this with Mom now, and she's having a hard time balancing it and trying to figure it out. And she's much older, you know. And I said, "I don't want to go through this again." And he said, "I know, you know, it is what it is. And, you know, she has to go through it." So I thought we had established a fairly good relationship, and, you know, and I thought we were going to be friends, and, you know, she got mad at me when my brother died, and she's never talked to me since. You know, she called me when my mother died. She talked to me all during the whole thing up to the funeral, and then I kept writing her, telling her what was going on up here, what we were doing to remember my mother and stuff like that, and she never, ever answered me again. And it's like, it's really sad. You realize that we're the only two left, and you're not talking to me, you know. And I think it's sad, but I don't know how to get a hold of her. And if that's what she wants, I guess that's what she wants. I think it's sad, you know. But she did go through things with my mother later in life that we had gone through earlier, and she was finally sober. That was the thing. She was finally sober. You know, I remember one time when she wasn't sober, and we were at my folks' house, and she said something about, well, I just do what I want, and I don't have to do this. Because somebody said something that being there at a certain time or doing something, and she said, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that for anybody. And I said, you know, if you're living in his house and you're eating his food, I think the least you can do is give him the courtesy of obeying his rules. You know, it's not asking that much of you. And she said, I don't have to do that. Yeah, she was very rebellious, and she still is. She's still very, very angry. It's obvious she's very, very angry, and part of it's her own fault. I mean, she would not make peace with my dad before he died. She knew he was dying. You know, it was time to make peace. Come on, you know. And she didn't, and she regrets it. She knew my brother was dying when I went there, and he told me he was dying. And I said to her, he's dying. You need to go see him. You need to make peace with him. I will, Gloria, I will. She knew. And when he died, she carried on like it was the end of the world, which really upset his kids. Really upset his kids. It's like, you were never here. You were never here to see my dad, and now you're carrying on like it's the end of the world. No, we don't buy it. Ernestine, of course, was taking care of her. And that made him mad too, because it was like, my mother's the one that should be comforted, not you.
Well, what about Sally?
She's a baby. Probably got the best of my mother. You know, I remember when she got married I was staying there, but I was across the street with my brothers most of the time because he lived across the street. And we were sitting outside talking, I don't know how, and she said to me, I don't know that woman that you guys know. I mean, I don't know her. She wasn't like that with me when I was a kid. And we said, yeah, we know. And she said, well, are you mad at me because she wasn't like that? Well, why would we be mad at you? Why would we be mad at you? We're not mad at you. We're glad somebody got our mother. You know. So one of us got one. But she was better with Sally. Maybe she was done with that kind of stuff. I don't know what it was. But anyway, it doesn't matter. She was better with Sally than she was with any of the rest of us. Sally looks the most like me. Her and I look exactly alike, and we look like my mother, both of us. And we used to laugh about that a lot. You know, she'd say, "Oh God, I look at you and I know what I'm going to look like in 10 years." You know, things like that. But she was very bright. She took some business classes after she finished high school, and that's when she got the job at the mayor's office. And she ran his office. That's what she did. She ran his office. And she married a jerk who was an alcoholic. And I don't think she ever really got over him, to tell you the truth. But that's when she moved in with my mother and brought her kids and took care of them. But she was a swimmer, you know that. You know, she did dancing, of course. She was an Indian princess several times.
What does that mean?
You know, when they have a festival, they have kings and queens and things like that, and they have the princesses at the festivals, and she was named princess several times at the festivals that they would have.
Because with costumes or looks or dancing?
But all. She really was a good dancer, and she really got into the whole thing. She was trying to teach Jody some of the stuff, some of the incense and some of the traditional Indian ways. And when we were there, and Jody was real interested, and she took a lot of time with Jody, and she
got an eagle feather.
Yeah, you only get it when you get named that way. That's the only way you can get them. Yeah, she had it. And I don't even know what they did with them. See, all that stuff is lost. Her buckskins. My dad bought white buckskins. I can't even think what that must have cost him. You know, leather, and my mother made her dress out of it and then beaded it all. It was absolutely gorgeous. You know. So yeah, she. We were a lot alike. Sally was probably the most like me than any of my sisters, any of my siblings, and so we always thought it was funny, you know, that we were like that. But she also didn't know me real well, and so Mother would say things, and then a couple of times she said things to me, and I said, "That's not true." One of the things she told me, this was really funny. was before the wedding, and I was there, and she said, "Can I ask you something?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And she said, "Am I your daughter?" And I laughed, and I said, "Who told you that?" And she said, "Christina. Christina said that you were." Well, we do look that much alike, you know. And so she said, "Christina said," and I said, "Let me tell you something, Sally. If I had a baby, I would not have given it to my parents to raise. I wouldn't have given my dog to raise, let alone a child. I wasn't happy in this house. You think I would give my child to them? No, honey. You're theirs. You're not mine." And
well, it's only now that I realize something that she said several times when we were playing as kids down in the basement, and she'd get mad at you. She'd complain, "This is my house." Now I understand why. She was raised there, and you grew up in a completely different house.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you know, I was very possessive of mine too. So
I never understood that. It's like, didn't you guys all grow up together?
No,
no. I never asked her.
Remember how much older I am than she is,
right?
Too. You know, so no, I was never there. I was a visitor once in a while.
Yeah.
But that was the other thing she got mad at, was the bedroom set. Oh God, did she get mad at that? My father bought this bedroom set for me when we had bunk beds. My brother and I had bunk beds in this house, and when it was time for me to move out, and he built the basement, and I had my own bedroom, we went looking for a bedroom suit for me, you know. And he took me to a furniture store, and he said, "Look and tell me what you want." So I looked around, and I went in the back part where they had used furniture, and I found this set that was just, I mean, it was gorgeous. I mean, I love it. You know, I still own it. And he said it has bunk beds, and I wanted a full bed. And he said, "It's got bunk beds. I'm not buying another bed for it. If you buy this, you take the bunk beds." And I kept looking around and going back, and you know how you do, you know. And I kept coming back to it. I said, "I want it." And he said, "Fine, you got bunk beds." So he bought it for me. And all the time I was growing up, it was in my room, and it was mine, right? Well, of course, when I left, I moved into an apartment with other people. So it was like, I didn't take any of that stuff. And so years later, one time we were home, and I was looking at the thing, and I said to my mom, "I just love this set." And my dad said, "Well, it's yours. It's yours. You know, if you want it, if you figure out a way to get it there, take it." And I said, "Well, how are the girls going to feel about that?" And he said, "It really doesn't matter. It is yours. I bought it for you. It belongs to you, and you can take it." So when I was working for Girl Scouts, I knew these delivery guys, because they used to deliver cookies for us, you know, Beacons, Moving and Storage. And one of the girls I worked with said, "Talk to him and see if he can do something for you." And he did. And he said, "I got this bedroom set. How is the cheapest way that I can get it up here? You know, so I don't want to go down and cart it all the way up here with it, you know, haul it up and all this kind of stuff." And he said, "Let me think about it." And then he called me one day, and he said, "Can you have it ready right away for me? I've got a truck down in the Denver area, and they can pick it up and pack it up." And I said, "What does he have to do?" "Just bring it out, disconnect the mirror so we don't break the mirror, and just have it ready for us." And I said, "Okay." So I called my dad and told him. And they shipped it up to me, and I got the bedroom set. Sally was not happy. Not happy.
What, she thought it was hers?
Well, I think she'd used it for a lot of years, so I think, yeah, you know. But my dad was the one that said to her, "It's gorgeous, and if she wants it, she can take it." She didn't like that. But she was really great with me. I mean, we had a good relationship. As she got older, we would go there, and she was always, you know, she always had lots of interesting things to talk about, and she was interesting. She was dynamic. She had a lot going on, you know. I liked her. I mean, I liked her a lot, and got to know her even more As the more I knew her, the more I liked her. And people said nothing but nice things about her when she ended up in the nursing home. And I went to the mayor's office to meet some of the people she worked with. I heard nothing but nice things about her. And it saddens me a lot that this happened to her because, quality of her life sucks. But I think it'll be a while because they said to us that she has a very strong heart and very strong lungs and everything's functioning. But you never know with MS because, they said she'd be dead by Christmas, and that was how many years ago. And they also said that they didn't know why she could still even talk because there were so many holes in her brain. She doesn't remember things very well. They tell her things, and they have pictures of her kids and pictures of us in her room to remind her. So she has that kind of remembrance, but she doesn't really. And the doctor said to me when I talked to him the last time, he said, part of it's the medication. We've got her so medicated that, and he said, but we don't know how much pain she's in because she can't really tell us. So it's difficult. We have to keep her medicated to a certain degree. And he said, but sometimes I go in her room and she's in there alone and she's crying. And I think sometimes she remembers, And I think that's sad. I want them to keep her medicated. I don't want her to remember, because it's too sad to remember, But she's a good kid. She took care of my mother after my dad died. And if she'd been able to keep everything in the closet, she would have. My mother kept saying, you cannot have everything. You may pick something of his, Sally, and keep it, but you may not have all of it. And she wanted all of it, That was the other thing that was in my dad's closet. It was my brother's army hat. When he was in the army, he was hanging in the closet. And I said, I'm taking this, Mother. Okay. I've got it in my closet.
So I think that's probably a good spot where we should wrap up.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to cover that came to mind? You wanted to circle back to anything like that before we stop? Because like I said, we could do this another time, another couple times.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about people this time. And
right.
That's
and what
important.
I'd like to get into next time is more about you and growing up.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, what that experience was like.
Right.
And but I'd like to save that for an entire different session.
Yeah, I think so too. Because, it's interesting that since you've talked to me about it, I've thought a lot about it, brought up a lot of memories that I'd forgotten about. But I've also talked to friends of mine about the same age as I am. And the interesting thing is, we all have some similar things, but we have a lot of different things because of the parts of the country we grew up in. So it's been kind of fun to explore that with people.
Okay, well, I'm stuck.